Picture a Roman home, and in the corner of the main room you'd find something that might surprise you. A small shrine, painted with dancing figures, where every morning the family gathered to make offerings of food and wine to invisible spirits they believed protected their home, their food supply, and their very lives. So sit back, grab a cup of tea, and get ready to explore how every Roman household had its own private shrine to household spirits called the lararium. Discover why Romans believed invisible guardians called Lares and Penates watched over their families and provisions. Understand how daily rituals of offerings and prayers kept these household gods happy and the family safe, and learn what the genius, the Compitalia festival, and the intimate nature of Roman domestic religion reveals about why the religion practiced in Roman homes was so different from the grand temples and public ceremonies we usually picture when we think of ancient Rome. When we think of Roman religion, we typically imagine grand marble temples, priests in elaborate robes, animal sacrifices on public altars, and festivals honouring gods like Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. These public ceremonies certainly existed and were important to Roman civic life. But there was another side to Roman religion, one that was far more personal, far more daily, and in many ways far more central to how ordinary Romans actually experienced the divine. This was domestic religion, the worship that happened not in temples but in homes, not led by priests but by the head of the household, not on special festival days but every single day. At the heart of Roman domestic religion was the lararium, a household shrine found in virtually every Roman home. The word comes from Lares, the guardian spirits who were the primary focus of worship at these shrines. A lararium could take many forms depending on the family's wealth and preferences. In wealthy homes, it might be an elaborate cabinet called an edicula, designed to look like a miniature temple with columns and a triangular pediment. In more modest homes, it might be a simple niche cut into the wall, or even just a painted scene on the plaster, with a small shelf for offerings below. The lararium was typically located in the atrium, the central hall of a Roman house, often near the hearth. This placement was significant. The hearth was the heart of the home, the source of warmth and the place where food was prepared. By placing the household shrine near the hearth, Romans connected their domestic gods to the most essential aspects of daily life: warmth, food, and family gathering. In some homes, particularly those of the less wealthy, the lararium was placed in the kitchen, right next to the food storage areas. This made practical sense for the worship of gods who protected provisions. The spirits worshipped at the lararium fell into several categories, each with distinct roles and characteristics. The most prominent were the Lares, specifically the Lares familiares, the Lares of the family. These were guardian spirits who protected the household and everyone in it. In Roman art, the Lares were depicted in a very distinctive way, as young men in short tunics, caught in a dancing pose with one leg raised, each holding a drinking horn called a rhyton in one hand and a shallow offering bowl called a patra in the other. They were almost always shown in pairs, flanking a central figure. The dancing pose of the Lares is one of their most recognizable features. They seem frozen in mid-step, as if performing an eternal dance of joy and celebration. The drinking horns they carry suggest festivity and abundance, while the offering bowls connect them to the rituals performed in their honor. Their youthful appearance conveys energy and vitality. These weren't solemn, distant gods. They were lively, approachable spirits who shared in the family's daily life. The origin of the Lares is somewhat mysterious, and ancient Romans themselves weren't entirely sure where these spirits came from. Some believed the Lares were originally ancestor spirits, the souls of deceased family members who continued to watch over their living descendants. This interpretation connects to the broader Roman reverence for ancestors and the importance of family continuity. Other ancient sources suggest the Lares were nature spirits associated with particular places, especially crossroads and boundaries. The truth may involve elements of both traditions, merged over centuries of religious development. What we can say with confidence is that the Lares were deeply connected to place. The Lares familiares protected the household, but there were also Lares compitales who guarded crossroads and neighborhoods, Lares vials, who protected travellers on roads, and Lares praestites, who watched over the city of Rome itself. This suggests that Romans saw their world as filled with protective spirits, each responsible for a particular location or community. The household Lares were simply the ones closest to daily life. Alongside the Lares in the household shrine were the penates, the depenates, or gods of the storeroom. The name comes from penus, the Latin word for the innermost part of the house where food was stored. The penates protected the family's provisions and, by extension, their prosperity and survival. In a world without refrigeration, where food storage was precarious, and a bad harvest could mean starvation, the gods who protected your food supply were vitally important. The penates had a special place in Roman mythology. According to tradition, Aeneas, the Trojan hero, who was the legendary ancestor of the Romans, brought the penates with him when he fled the burning city of Troy. These sacred objects, along with the eternal flame of Vesta, were the spiritual foundations of Rome itself. Every Roman household that honoured its own penates was thus connected to this founding myth, participating in a tradition that stretched back to the very origins of Roman civilization. Unlike the Lares, who had a distinctive visual appearance, the penates didn't have a standard iconography. They were often depicted simply as generic divine figures, or they might be represented by whatever gods the family particularly honoured. In practice, the penates and Lares were often worshipped together at the same shrine, their identities somewhat blurred in daily practice, even if they were theoretically distinct. The third major figure in household worship was the genius, a concept that's harder to translate into modern terms. The genius was the divine spirit or life force of the male head of household, the pater familias. It represented his power to generate life, to continue the family line, to maintain the household as a living entity across generations. The genius wasn't exactly the man himself, but it wasn't entirely separate either. It was the divine aspect of his existence, the spiritual power that made him the centre of his family. In lararium paintings, the genius was typically depicted as a toga-clad man, often with his head covered in the manner of someone performing a religious ritual. He might be shown making an offering, pouring wine or placing incense on an altar. Sometimes the genius was represented not as a human figure, but as a snake, a creature that Romans associated with protective spirits and the souls of ancestors. Many lararium paintings show snakes at the bottom of the scene, approaching an altar with offerings. The snake imagery is fascinating and appears in Lauraria throughout the Roman world. These weren't threatening serpents, but beneficent ones, often depicted approaching offerings of eggs or fruit placed on small altars. The connection between snakes and household spirits may relate to the fact that snakes often lived in and around Roman houses, emerging from holes in walls or floors. Rather than seeing these creatures as pests, Romans interpreted their presence as a sign of divine protection. The snake in the lararium painting represented this protective presence in visual form. Women had their own equivalent of the genius, called the Juno. Just as the genius represented the divine life force of the pater familias, the Juno represented the divine spirit of the mater familias, the female head of household. The Juno was associated with women's fertility and their role in continuing the family line. While the genius received more attention in household worship, reflecting the patriarchal nature of Roman society, the Juno was also honoured, particularly on the woman's birthday. The daily rituals at the lararium were simple but consistent. Each day, typically at mealtimes, the family would make offerings to the household gods. These offerings were modest: a portion of food from the meal, a small amount of wine, a pinch of incense, perhaps some flowers or a garland. The pater familias usually performed the ritual, though other family members might do so in his absence. The offerings were placed on a small altar or shelf in front of the lararium, and prayers were spoken asking for the gods' continued protection. The morning offering was particularly important. Before the day's activities began, the family acknowledged their household gods and asked for their blessing. This created a rhythm to daily life, a moment of religious observance that marked the transition from sleep to waking activity. The evening offering, often made before or after the main meal, bookended the day with another moment of connection to the divine. Special occasions called for more elaborate rituals. On the calends, nones and ides of each month, the 1st, 5th or 7th and 13th or 15th days, depending on the month, families made special offerings at the lararium. Birthdays were particularly important. On the birthday of the pater familias, special offerings were made to his genius. Weddings, births, coming-of-age ceremonies, and other family milestones all involved rituals at the household shrine. The offerings themselves tell us something about Roman religious thinking. By giving a portion of food and wine to the gods, the family was sharing their sustenance with the divine beings who made that sustenance possible. It was a reciprocal relationship. The gods protected the household, and the household honoured the gods with offerings. Neglecting the offerings might anger the gods and withdraw their protection. Maintaining the offerings kept the relationship healthy and the household safe. Incense played a special role in these offerings. The rising smoke was believed to carry prayers and offerings up to the gods. The pleasant smell was thought to please divine beings. Incense was also practical. It masked less pleasant odours in Roman homes, which lacked modern sanitation. But its primary purpose was religious, creating a sensory experience that marked the moment as sacred, different from ordinary time. The wall paintings that decorated many lararia are among our best sources for understanding Roman household religion. Hundreds of these paintings survive from Pompeii and Herculaneum, the cities buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. The volcanic ash that destroyed these cities also preserved them, including the painted lararia in homes throughout the urban area. These paintings show a remarkably standardized iconography, suggesting that household religion followed established conventions across Roman society. A typical lararium painting shows the Lares in their characteristic dancing pose, flanking a central figure who is usually the genius of the paterfamilias. Below the main figures, snakes approach a small altar where offerings have been placed. The scene might include garlands, fruit, eggs, and other offerings. The colours are often bright and vivid, reds, yellows, greens, making the shrine a visually striking element of the home's decoration. The standardization of these images is significant. It suggests that Roman household religion wasn't a matter of individual invention, but followed recognized patterns. A Roman visiting another family's home would immediately recognize the lararium and understand its religious significance. The dancing Lares, the toga-clad genius, the protective snakes, these were a shared visual vocabulary that connected Roman households across the Mediterranean world. One of the most striking aspects of Roman household religion was its inclusivity within the home. The Lares protected everyone who lived in the household, not just the family members, but also the slaves. Slaves participated in lararium rituals, making offerings alongside their masters. In a society built on slavery, where slaves were legally property rather than persons, this religious inclusion is remarkable. At the household shrine, at least, slaves were part of the religious community. This inclusion extended to the Compitalia, an annual festival honouring the Lares Compitales, the Lares of the crossroads. The Compitalia was held in early January, and it was a neighbourhood celebration centred on the shrines located at crossroads where multiple properties met. What made the Compitalia distinctive was that slaves played a prominent role. For this one festival, the normal social hierarchy was somewhat relaxed, and slaves participated alongside free persons in honouring the neighbourhood Lares. During the Compitalia, families would hang woolen dolls called maniae and woolen balls called pillae at the crossroads shrines. The dolls represented the free members of the household, while the balls represented the slaves. This practice may have had an ancient origin in human sacrifice, the dolls substituting for actual people, though by historical times it was simply a traditional offering. The hanging of these objects was a public declaration of the household's composition, a way of presenting the family to the neighbourhood Lares. The Compitalia also involved feasting, games, and general celebration. It was a moment when the neighbourhood came together, when the boundaries between households became permeable, when the community as a whole honoured the spirits that protected them all. The prominent role of slaves in this festival suggests that the Lares Compitales, like the Lares Familiares, were understood to protect everyone in their domain regardless of social status. Freedmen, former slaves who had been manumitted, often maintained strong connections to household religion. A freedman might continue to honour the Lares of his former master's household, maintaining a religious bond even after the legal relationship had ended. Some freedmen became priests of the Lares at crossroads shrines, positions that gave them status and religious authority in their neighbourhoods. For people who had been slaves, household religion offered a path to religious participation and community standing. The relationship between household religion and public religion in Rome was complementary rather than competitive. Romans didn't choose between worshipping at home and worshipping at temples. They did both. Public religion addressed the needs of the community and the state, honouring the great gods who protected Rome as a whole. Household religion addressed the needs of the family, honouring the spirits who protected the individual home. Both were necessary for a complete religious life. The paterfamilias served as the priest of his own household. He didn't need professional clergy to intercede with the household gods. He had direct access to them through the rituals performed at the lararium. This gave Roman domestic religion an immediacy, an intimacy that public religion lacked. The great temples were impressive but distant. The lararium was right there in your home, a constant presence in daily life. This priestly role of the paterfamilias reinforced his authority within the household. He was not just the legal and economic head of the family, but also its religious leader. His genius was honoured at the household shrine. He performed the daily offerings. He led the family in worship. Religion and family authority were intertwined, each reinforcing the other. The architecture of Roman houses reflected the importance of household religion. The atrium, where the lararium was typically located, was the most public part of the private home, the space where visitors were received and family business conducted. By placing the household shrine in this prominent location, Romans made their religious devotion visible to anyone who entered. The lararium was a statement about the family's piety and their connection to the divine. In wealthier homes, the lararium might be an impressive piece of furniture, a wooden cabinet with doors that could be opened to reveal the shrine within, or a stone structure built into the wall with columns and architectural details mimicking a temple. These elaborate lararia demonstrated the family's wealth and their serious commitment to household religion. They were status symbols as well as religious objects. In more modest homes, the lararium was simpler, but no less important. A painted niche in the wall, a small shelf with a few statuettes, a corner of the kitchen set aside for offerings. These humble shrines served the same religious purpose as the elaborate cabinets of the wealthy. The universality of the lararium across economic classes shows how central household religion was to Roman life. Rich or poor, every family had their household gods. The bronze statuettes of Lares that have survived from antiquity give us another window into household religion. These small figures, typically 6 to 12 inches tall, show the Lares in their characteristic dancing pose. They were portable objects that could be placed on the lararium shelf, moved for cleaning, or even taken when the family travelled. Some families accumulated multiple statuettes over generations, creating a collection of Lares figures that represented their ongoing devotion. These statuettes have been found throughout the Roman world, from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. Their wide distribution shows how Roman household religion spread with Roman culture. When Romans settled in new territories, they brought their household gods with them. When local populations adopted Roman ways, they adopted Roman domestic religion, along with Roman language, law, and customs. The Lares became part of a shared Mediterranean culture. The material evidence from Pompeii and Herculaneum is particularly valuable because it shows household religion in context. We can see exactly where lararia were placed in actual homes, what objects were found near them, how they related to other features of domestic architecture. In some houses, the lararium was the most elaborately decorated feature, suggesting that families invested significant resources in honouring their household gods. Archaeologists have found offerings still in place at some Pompeian lararia, the remains of food, the residue of wine, the ashes of incense. These material traces of ancient rituals bring us remarkably close to the daily religious practice of ordinary Romans. We can almost see the paterfamilias standing before the shrine, placing his offerings, speaking his prayers, asking the Lares and Penates to continue protecting his family. The connection between household religion and ancestor worship deserves special attention. The Lares may have originated as ancestor spirits, and even in historical times, the connection between household gods and deceased family members remained strong. Wealthy Roman families kept wax masks of their ancestors, called imagines, which were displayed in the atrium near the lararium. These masks were brought out for family funerals, when living family members would wear them in procession, literally embodying their ancestors. This ancestor connection gave household religion a temporal depth that extended beyond the present moment. When a Roman made offerings at the lararium, he was participating in rituals that his father had performed, and his grandfather, and his great-grandfather, back through the generations. The household gods had protected the family for as long as anyone could remember. Maintaining their worship was a duty to the ancestors, as well as a service to the present family. The genius, in particular, represented this continuity across generations. The genius of the paterfamilias was not just his individual life force, but the ongoing vitality of the family line. When a man died and his son became paterfamilias, the son's genius became the focus of worship. The divine power passed from generation to generation, just as the family itself continued through time. Household religion was thus intimately connected to Roman concerns about family continuity and the perpetuation of the family name. The end of traditional Roman household religion came gradually with the rise of Christianity. As the Roman Empire became Christian in the 4th and 5th centuries, the old gods were abandoned. The lararium, with its lares and penates and genius, gave way to Christian symbols, crosses, images of Christ and the saints, holy water fonts. The daily offerings ceased. The dancing Lares fell silent, but some elements of household religion may have survived in transformed form. Christian homes developed their own domestic devotional practices, prayers before meals, household shrines with crucifixes and icons, the blessing of homes by priests. The impulse to bring religion into the home, to create sacred space within domestic life, continued even as the specific gods and rituals changed. The lararium was gone, but the human need it served, the desire for divine protection of home and family, remained. What does Roman household religion teach us about the Romans themselves? First, that their religious life was far richer and more varied than the grand public ceremonies suggest. The daily offerings at the lararium were more frequent and more personal than any temple ritual. For most Romans, the household gods were the divine beings they interacted with most regularly. Second, that Roman religion was deeply practical. The laws protected the home, the penates protected the food supply, the genius ensured family continuity. These weren't abstract theological concepts, but concrete concerns about survival and prosperity. Roman household religion addressed the most basic human needs: safety, sustenance, and the continuation of the family. Third, that religion permeated Roman daily life in ways we might not expect. Every meal began with an offering. Every morning started with a prayer. Every significant family event involved the household gods. There was no sharp boundary between sacred and secular. The divine was present in the most ordinary moments of domestic life. Fourth, that Roman society, for all its hierarchies and inequalities, had spaces where those boundaries softened. At the lararium, slaves and masters worshipped together. At the Compitalia, the neighbourhood celebrated as a community. Household religion created bonds that crossed social divisions, even if it didn't eliminate them. The lararium stands as a testament to the intimate, personal side of Roman religion. The great temples and public festivals get more attention in history books, but the household shrine was where most Romans actually encountered the divine on a daily basis. The dancing Lares, the protective penates, the life-giving genius, these were the gods who shared Roman homes, who received daily offerings, who were asked to bless meals and protect families and ensure prosperity. When we look at the painted lararia preserved in the ashes of Pompeii, we're looking at something deeply human: the desire to feel protected, the hope that invisible powers watch over us and our loved ones, the practice of expressing gratitude and asking for continued blessing. The specific gods are gone, the rituals abandoned, the shrines empty. But the impulse that created them, the need to make our homes sacred, to invite the divine into our daily lives, that impulse remains as strong as ever. The Romans who stood before their Lararia 2,000 years ago, making their morning offerings, speaking their prayers, would recognize something in us, and we in them. The forms of religion change, the names of gods come and go, but the human need for sacred space in domestic life endures. The lararium reminds us that religion isn't just about temples and priests and public ceremonies. It's also about the quiet moments at home, the daily rituals, the small offerings made in hope and gratitude. In those household shrines painted with dancing spirits and protective snakes, we see Romans at their most human, seeking blessing, expressing devotion, hoping for protection in an uncertain world.